Charles, let's talk about the legal import. The legal import. I wrote the other day a piece about don't sleep on the records custodians, these people that seem so boring sometimes, these witnesses that seem like they're not really the sexy ones, but they're the ones that get the evidence in. We saw that happen this afternoon with this guy who's the tech guy. Your thoughts about the fact that now the jury has recess for the day, and even though Beauvais, on behalf of Trump, has gotten up to start his cross, the jury has been left with that recorded conversation between Cohen and Trump, basically memorializing the conspiracy to hush money pay and the way that it was going to be done.
Well, I think for those of us who haven't tried cases before, this is a really important time to sort of understand that we have settled into a normal rhythm and cadence for what it is to try cases. Every day is not going to be explosive. Every moment is not going to be incredible. You're going to have these progressive ebbs and flows throughout the course of a trial with witnesses that may not seem like on the surface super duper incredibly interesting, but have a purpose. And these custodians, these record custodians, are an example of that because they're absolutely imperative in a case like this for multiple reasons. On the surface, you want to be able to bring in certain documents to authenticate them and to understand and get the jury to understand that these are things that are important pieces of evidence that are valid, that the defense is not going to be able to challenge the authenticity of. But beyond that, in a case like the prosecution has here, if today showed us anything, Katie, and I'm so glad you brought that up because it's such an interesting contrast. If we learned anything about this case today, is that it is extremely messy and it deals with a bunch of messy individuals. You're talking about the president, a playmate, and a porn star, and hush money payments. I mean, this is, it could not sound more salacious than it actually is. All of these witnesses, for the most part, have a number of different credibility issues, whether it's the motives that they have around getting back at the former president for whatever it is that they did not get from him that they thought they were entitled to, Allah Michael Cohen, whether it's trying to advance your career, Allah Stormy Daniels. And the way the prosecution is going to deal with that is to focus on the actual documents. They're going to focus on the things that are indisputable and undeniable. And so in order to have those things get put in front of the jury, you need these authentication witnesses to substantiate everything that they're going to see and validate it in such a way that you cannot argue against it. So that's why, even though they're not the ones with the sexy testimony and the explosive, accounts of what was going on behind the scenes, they're critically important to establishing the actual case that the prosecution has to prove.
Yeah, and if they don't, go ahead, Molly. I'm sorry.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Why Pecker is such a good witness is because he's not like that. He has a relationship with Trump, and we're going to see other witnesses like that. The assistant, then also Hope Hicks. So not every witness is so problematic as Michael Cohen. I mean, I think he is. So what I think is smart is what they're doing is they're doing it in a very slow way so that he really comes up at the end so that there's a real complete story. And then he is just additive. And I think what you're saying is the anxiety that a lot of us had was that this story all hinged on him. And the fact that there really is a lot more, I think, is a big deal.
Yeah, Charles, we're going to get to a viewer question right now. It's coming from Rob. Rob, thanks for tuning into our YouTube live stream. Those of you, put your questions in here. Rob's asking, did Stormy Daniels sign an NDA or not? Can she testify? It's actually a great question for Rob, right, Charles? Because normally with a non-disclosure, you can't testify, but she should be appearing via a subpoena. So does that change things legally for Stormy Daniels? Can she testify if she's been subpoenaed?
She can testify if she's been subpoenaed, and that is something that we would likely see and be brought up. It's clear that, there was this clip from Jimmy Kimmel that surfaced around her being on Jimmy Kimmel and sort of not answering the question of whether she had an NDA or did not. And then Jimmy Kimmel sort of went through it and ultimately got to the point of getting her to admit, if you didn't have an NDA, you could acknowledge that you didn't have an NDA, couldn't you? And she said, oh, Jimmy, you're so smart. So we know for the most part that Stormy Daniels does have an NDA, and that's not a question. It's something that's pretty much been established. But the subpoena that you talked about, Katie, that's the linchpin. That's the key that's going to allow her to get on the stand and to talk. Although, let's be really honest and clear. The prosecution's utility around Stormy Daniels' testimony, when you put it in the context of everything that we've heard, is not as great as you would think. She's not someone who is a quote unquote essential witness for the prosecution in the sense of establishing what is needed to be established around Donald Trump's guilt or innocence. What you are talking about with Donald Trump is that he made these hush money payments and basically falsified business records to conceal the hush money payments so that he can influence the election. Stormy Daniels, Karen McDougal, their testimony adds some color to the actual story itself. But given the witnesses that we've heard so far that have explained the scheme, that have introduced the evidence, and that have connected the paperwork, Stormy Daniels' testimony is kind of sort of icing on the cake as opposed to being the heart of what the prosecution wants to tell the jury.
So for that color that you're talking about, we are going to have Adam Reese. He is with us. He's our, as I said, producer extraordinaire from MSNBC and NBC. He's been in the courtroom. He's the one who's going to be able to tell us what was going on with Donald Trump. Adam, I wanted to ask you, you know, that big, I was saying that recorded conversation, secretly recorded by Michael Cohen between him and Donald Trump about making that payment. Trump saying paid in cash, Cohen saying no. I mean, we know that Trump throughout the day, almost every day, is slumping in his chair with his eyes closed. And again, I'm not going to say he's sleeping, although it does suggest that he is. But did you see moments of interest where Trump looked like he was more engaged and listening? And if so, when? Because does it look like he was concerned in any capacity with the evidence that was getting in front of that jury?
Absolutely. And to that point, at that particular moment, that was a real smoking gun when Mr. Doss from the Manhattan DA's office brought up various emails and texts. He scrubbed Michael Cohen's two phones. And this came out, this phone conversation, we've all heard it a million times. Michael Cohen and Donald Trump speaking in Donald Trump's office at Trump Tower, speaking about the hush money payment. And Mr. Trump was very interested in this moment. He was looking up when the transcripts from these conversations came up. It was really the first time I saw him actually looking at the monitor with the transcripts, looking closely, looking at that monitor. I can bring up another moment earlier in the morning when we were discussing the gag orders, and the prosecutor was saying, you know, Mr. Trump is really, he knows what he's doing. He's making these comments, and it is interfering with the trial. And when Todd Blanche's defense attorney got up, Judge Merchan said, you know, no one's asking him to go out and go up to these cameras. He's doing that on his own. And Todd Blanche said, I actually agree with you, Judge. And Donald Trump, literally, the first time I saw him, turned around, looked at Todd Blanche, and just shook his head. He couldn't believe that he had said that. So he was a bit more involved. He is still dozing off. I shouldn't say dozing off. He's closing his eyes. We don't know what he's doing at those moments, but he's certainly closing his eyes.
Adam, after that exchange with Blanche and Judge Merchan, we've known that Todd Blanche fumbled the ball pretty badly last week with the other gag order hearing. We saw what the ruling came in earlier this week. Did you see any other kind of heated kind of energy between Trump and Blanche? I mean, Trump is notoriously not getting along with his counsel and gets angry when they're losing or when something goes afoul of what Trump wants.
We've seen those reports, and I must say, they seem to be getting along fine. They're constantly chatting. Blanche is constantly chuckling at what Donald Trump is saying. They're having constant contact back and forth, whispering with each other. But in terms of the gag order, I do think Blanche did better this time. It appears that Judge Merchan will be a little more amenable. There are 4 citations, 4 gag order violations. I think there were 2 for Michael Cohen, 1 for the jury and 1 for Pecker when Donald Trump went to a construction site here in Manhattan at 50th and Park Avenue, where the new JP Morgan building is going up. And he spoke to construction workers. And then there was a Q&A after that. And he was asked about Pecker in his testimony, and he said, Pecker's a good guy. Judge Merchan seems a little more amenable that he won't punish Trump for that one, but we'll have to see. He did not rule yet.
Yeah, so let's bring in Adam Parkamenko, who is a political analyst who's worked with Hillary Clinton and on other big Democratic campaigns. Adam, I want to ask you about that because I want to stay on the gag order for a second here. A lot of the complaints that are coming out about an unfair justice application of a standard here. Trump otherwise should be in jail for violating the gag order multiple times. A lot of us, including me, believing that if it was me or some other kind of Joe or Jane citizen involved, they would be in jail by now, having violated the gag order. But other people are saying it's actually good that Merchan doesn't put Trump in jail because he'll use it as political capital to not only fundraise, but to campaign on it to make it seem like this is more of a quote unquote witch hunt. Your thoughts on whether or not Merchan should continue the path of just a fine and not actually put him in jail?
I think Merchan is treading very lightly. The prosecutors haven't asked for jail just yet. And Trump has lightened up on the attacks on the witnesses, on Cohen and Stormy. But Blanche made some very powerful arguments today that Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels continue to attack him. The newspapers are attacking him. Michael Cohen is now on TikTok. And so I think the judge seemed like he was giving that some serious consideration, and that Trump is running for the office of presidency once again, and that he should be allowed to make comments. But we're going to have to see how he rules on these 4 violations.
Yeah, and sorry for that confusing traffic here of me asking this. Adam Parkhamenko, political analyst, running a lot of Democratic campaigns and working very tightly with Hillary Rodham Clinton on her campaigns. Adam, my question to you is whether or not Donald Trump should go to jail for violating the gag orders, or whether Merchan should stay the course and not give him some political currency to fundraise some more or to kind of further buttress Trump's false claims that this is a witch hunt.
Thanks for having me, and always nice to be with 2 Adams. I think that, look, many of us that are partisan and less objective would love to see him go to jail and get the same treatment that just about anybody else would. With that said, I think that a number of individuals that are authoritative experts, such as yourselves on the legal front, have talked, including a former Supreme Court justice in New York State, giving him, the judge, a rating of an A+. It seems to me that like he's going about this methodically, carefully, and the best that he can. And there's a number of things that have come up in this. Testimony. I think one of them was talking about Michael Cohen and photo shoots, and it'll be interesting to see when others are on the stand what comes out of that, because that photo shoot, my understanding, was actually Michael's daughter raising money for St. Jude's under the Eric Trump Foundation. So I think there's a lot more color and context to find out. With that said, I think the judge has done a great job to date. And I think that the news that came out in court today, where they were, Trump was submitting these potential posts, shows that he is indeed scared of doing jail time, despite him saying it would be his honor to go.
So we're going to have a viewer question that's going to come in now. We're waiting for that viewer question.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, Molly, go ahead while I'm waiting for the viewer question to come in.
I think that the whole idea that Trump should not be held accountable because he might make something of it is such a fallacy. And we have for so long heard we can't, Trump can't be held responsible. He can't be impeached. He can't be removed. He can't be, because of his people. And he's really ridden that a lot. And the truth is, I don't think Merchan is going to put him in jail, because I think he's too careful. And I think that it would just be too much of a headache for him. But I do think that that is sort of a fallacy. And that we are all sort of, the reality is either the law is the law or it's not.
I don't disagree. I mean, my personal opinion, I think that if the legal standard is met, and I said this earlier today on MSNBC, if the DA's office wasn't intending on pursuing the remedies of a motion for contempt, they certainly should have filed it in the first place, and anyone else would be in jail by now. And so for those of you in the chat that are saying you should put him in jail, I think I said earlier today they should put him in the pokey. And he should be in the pokey for a little while, and it won't be hokey pokey. Charles, I want to go back to you on this recorded conversation that is a smoking gun that Adam Reese talked about. Donald Trump perking up in court, listening and looking at the monitor when this transcript was read and the conversation that was recorded was played. Charles, my question for you is this. I'm only going to read 2 sentences of it. Cohen saying, "I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David. that being David Pecker, you know, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken, Trump, give it to me, and it's unintelligible. And then Cohen says this, Charles, and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with. And then Trump says, so what do we got to pay for this? $150? Cohen says funding. Yes. And it's all that stuff. I'm going to stop now. I mean, Charles, do you need Alan Weisselberg, who's now going to Rikers and hanging out for his perjury charge, the second time around for perjury? Do you need him to finish painting this picture? Is it enough that you've got Cohen, who's going to take the stand imminently? And we'll get to the question that was there earlier by our great viewer about Hope Hicks. But from Jessica, but Charles, do you really need Alan Weisselberg here? Would it be worth it for the DA's office to drag him in, or the fact that he's doing time for perjury just makes him a worthless witness?
I don't know that it makes him a worthless witness, but in the case like this, we have a recording and then you have another witness who was privy to that conversation or part of that conversation who's going to add context. I think that that's enough. I think that you have documents. I think you have this recording. I think you have the witness who's in the conversation who can give enough context around everything that is actually being heard on the tape. Like that's enough such that Weisselberg, the other half of it, the other side of it, becomes less and less significant because of everything else that you have that you can clearly put in front of the jury without the hassle of dealing with the witness who's currently incarcerated for perjury. And now you don't have, and here's the other thing, Katie, you've already got one witness who's going to jail for lying on the stand. You don't want to necessarily have to bring in another one, and that's Michael Cohen. He's done jail time for that. You don't want to bring in a second witness who's also currently in jail for lying on the stand and now have to sort of do the credibility dance with both of them when you have the videotape. When you have the actual recording. So there's no need for Weisselberg and extending that, and then also sort of creating more and more of a space where, as the prosecution, you have to explain or figure out why the jury should believe, your witnesses when you've added yet another witness with significant credibility issues.
Yeah, listen, I think dirty birds of a feather flock together, but that's just my 2 cents.
How it works is you got a 98% offset, okay? There's big gaps here is when you're selling a whole bunch of electricity back to the utility company.